The tips and traps and where things go horribly wrong for families. And let me tell you, over the years, I've seen some things go horribly wrong for families, and I've seen them get themselves in dreadful pickles. Um, but I think the first thing is that one that I mentioned before, thinking that you have to pay that full room cost and that their only option is to sell the home. And, and people will say that. And I'm on a little local Facebook site for my local area, everything Sutherlandshire it is. But anyway, there'll be every month or so there'll be somebody putting a post on there saying, "Oh, mum needs to go into aged care and it's so expensive. It seems to be a lot of fees and charges. Oh, I don't know what to do." And people get on there and say, "Well, you just have to sell the home." Oh, they'll go on there with half truths and like
Yeah.
everything will be a little bit right but a lot wrong. And the poor person put the initial post up after 75 replies that are all a little bit right and a little bit wrong. If they were a little bit confused to start off with, they will be totally confused by the end. So that's the other trap. Don't go to the wrong source for information. Don't ask Barry at the bowling club because his personal financial situation is completely different to yours. And all of this is means tested, is based on your personal financial situation. The other thing that people do wrong is selling assets without understanding the implications on aged care fees and age pension and tax and estate planning. Estate planning is really important. So I've had situations where mum now has dementia, she's going into care. In her will, she's left the home to, say, the son or the daughter, and the remainder of her estate to the other, lumpy assets left to one person, the remainder of the estate's left to the other person, the other child. If you're selling that home to go into aged care, what happens with the will and what happens with mum's wishes for what's happening with? Because essentially, if that home is no longer there and all that's left is the money that's in the estate, how are we going to equalise that estate? And it's too late to make changes to the estate planning because mum doesn't have capacity. She has dementia. So when we do the planning around aged care, we have to do a deep dive and really take a 360 view of the full situation. And that's what people do. They make these panic decisions without understanding the full implications of everything. As I mentioned before, family lending money to pay care costs can be an issue. Poorly considered actions with the family. So prior to COVID anyway, I used to give these big public seminars on aged care, and every time in the seminar, at the question time at the end, somebody would put their hand up and say, "Can't I give my house and all my assets to my children before I go into aged care so I can go into care without having to pay much?" And I say, yes, that'd be lovely. Your family would really appreciate it. But just make sure that when you go into aged care, they're able to give you that money back to pay for your aged care. Because if you give your money away, the gifting rules apply with Centrelink. They will treat that asset essentially as still being yours for the next 5 years. And anyway, if you want good quality care and if you want that, a glass of champagne with your meal every night and access to Foxtel and all the bells and whistles, you might actually want that money to be able to pay for it. Things like going into granny flat rights, joint property ownership, it can be an issue with aged care. Setting up family trusts, family trust involvement, company involvement, these are all complicating factors with aged care.
What about granny flats? What about if someone just said, "Let's build one out the back"?
Yeah, that's great, wonderful. But if mum has been assessed as needing residential care and you go, "Listen, let's set up a granny flat and give me this money and we'll set up a granny flat," Centrelink can review that and they can consider it as deprivation. If entry to residential aged care was anticipated, they can look at that as a way of you trying to get rid of money before going into aged care. And granny flat rights can be wonderful and, fantastic, wonderful for family, everybody involved. They can also go horribly wrong. For it to actually be a granny flat right, the person who is the granny can't actually be on title for the property. And I've had a lot of families where they've come and they've said, "Oh, we've got a granny flat arrangement. Mum, and we bought a house together, or we put mum on title of our property. She owns half the property now and she lives in the granny flat out the back." And I say, "Well, it's not a granny flat. She owns half of your property." So that is not a granny flat and that will be accessible for aged care. So granny flats, wonderful. Come with a word of warning. Get legal and financial advice if you're going into a granny flat arrangement. Joint
Yeah,
property
very much.
ownership. I can remember a lovely lady and quite wealthy family, and she had 4 sons and she'd bought them all a home, but she had remained on title for all of those properties. So when it came to aged care, she basically was a part owner in 4 properties plus her own property and didn't think that that was fair at all. But that's the reality. She was a joint owner, so it was an assessable asset for her.